afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch. My name is Johan Hutting. I work for ING, a Dutch bank, one of the largest Dutch banks, actually also quite active within Europe, but I'm there as a software engineer most of the time, and 20% of the time I'm a developer advocate where I help people work on their engineering culture or adapting to new technologies within Java, including the records. And it's called migrate to immutability because people expect it to be immutable. And as it's described by the Java engineers themselves, it's a new language feature. It was available in Java 14 already as a preview feature. In Java 16, you got it for real. So if you have an LTS version like 17 or 21 or 25 coming up, you will actually get it for free. And it's supposed to act as a transparent carrier for immutable data. And that's, I think, the right wording, including some of the pitfalls that you can run into, which we'll discuss in this session. So anyone already using Java records? Can I see some hands? Perfect. Anyone think they are fully immutable? Because they're not, unfortunately. It's not syntactic sugar. You get some stuff for free, like a canonical constructor, which means that you get all the fields that you have in that class, because it is a basic Java class, after all, to supply. So you don't have to write one yourself. You get a toString for free. You get a hash code and equals for free as well. So typically, the stuff you would do with Lombok in the past, it's no longer needed. You can actually use the record class for that as well. So what does this look like? You just create a record. You can see the canonical constructor along with the fields. And well, a nice example for this is a box, because a box has dimensions, it has a label, and typically it also has contents. So you can more or less guess what I'm going to use as an example. And that way you can more simple describe it in one line. And this lowers your the perception of the code that you have, so it's easier to understand and read. So the cognitive load, which is what I was referring to, is being reduced. It's easier to understand if you just read a record class compared to a full class with a lot of text, a lot of getters and setters in it. You get those for free now, so you don't have to code them, and you can assume them to be there. It's all transparent. All the content in the record class is available to be read by other classes. And it's built that way to transport data between different components. So that can be a server. It can also be a different class from another module. And it can also, because it is a class, but it's not syntactic sugar, it can actually also improve your performance, because the amount of memory it uses compared to a normal class is lower. Of course, you always have to test this, but in high volume systems, this will also help you perform better. And if you want to get rid of Lombok, which some people do want, I'm not fully on board yet. I do want to get rid of Lombok if I can, but not always. It will also help you out there, because you no longer need a value class or even a data class if you don't mutate data in them. So if you migrate towards records from your existing classes, which is fairly easy, you can typically use your ID to do that, but you can also just start writing your code and removing getters and setters. You might notice some side effects, because in the past, if you have code for over 1 or 2 years, some people might have added mutable data to it, and that will fail at that point. So your test might fail, and you will have to fix those. But I think that's actually a good thing, because your code will be better in the end. So you shouldn't use records when you need to hide fields. For example, password texts or data that you want to adjust before you give it back to another user of your class, like some other piece of code or another library. In that case, just use a normal class. And the same applies to using mutable fields. I will cover that you can actually mutate fields, but you shouldn't, because people expect records to be immutable, so keep them immutable. Again, cognitive load. You don't want to think about, why did this data change? It should be immutable in a record. So they offer shallow immutability. The fields that you apply to a record, those are immutable. And that just means, like for example, I give the box, and I've added a list at this point with contents, because well, a box has contents. But it could also be an array list. So all the fields applied, those are immutable. I can't say replace the contents with another object. But the objects within the array list, those are mutable, because an array list is mutable. So you can actually add and remove data within that list. So code is readable in the back as well, I hope. You can actually have an array list. You add the item, you create the new record, then still add a new item, and it will be in there, and add another item, both on the original list and in the record, and you can just mutate those. This will cause bugs in your application that you might not expect, simply because you would expect a record to be immutable. So there are some ways around this, which I will cover in this session, and well, as you can see, I hope the test is fast enough. All tests are fine, so. To get back to the part where you can actually mutate data and how to prevent that, there's multiple solutions. One I ran into was defensive constructors. So basically, at that point, you will say, I will fill it with default values. And this might be quite good for you. But for someone using your record, or for example, someone looking at your code half a year from now, this might not be clear anymore, because magic is happening and you are getting default values back. In this case, an empty list, or a list that's copied. But if that's a big list, that's also taking a lot of resources to, at that point, make it immutable for you. The list copy off is the correct reason to actually make the list immutable within Java. And the same with the label. Well, there's no label, and at that point you want to say, okay, I just put a random name on it. You can, of course, combine those, but it's a bit tricky. Another thing you might notice, in the top, there's no real constructor anymore. You can add all the fields that you added to your record as a constructor as well. But then you need to add all the fields. You can't say, oh, I only want to add a label and a width at this point. So it's preferred to just do it like this. Otherwise, you will be copying code, and again, cognitive load. You don't want to do things double. Another way to work around this is to use validate-only constructors, which means throwing exceptions. So you're adding data to an object. At that point, you're going to throw illegal argument exceptions. So it's predictable what will happen if I create a record that I'm not supposed to create. For example, if I add an array list, then it will actually fail at that point. And what I'm doing here in this case is that I'm doing an add all list off. I'm not doing a remove, because a list can be empty. And then you have to do another, check for another exception. And as you can see, IntelliJ doesn't really like me doing this. There's a nice brownie, like, hey, you should do something in this exception, but it's expected behavior. I do want it to fail because I don't want to add anything to this list. Then I know it's immutable at that point. And the same with the label. If it's empty or not, you can just give a illegal argument exception back with something sensible for the developer to understand. So this will fail in test if you have proper test coverage on your code. And I think this is the better way for engineers to build solid code, which is also understandable and easy to read. I think I have an example as well in my... Because one of the other solutions one of my colleagues came up with is, hey, why don't you use an immutable list or a modifiable list from Java util collections? But the thing here is that you can actually, if you still have the original array list that you put into that unmodifiable list, you can still modify it. So list copy off is the proper way to create an unmodifiable list that you can no longer add content to. So another thing you often have to do, because the data has become immutable at this point, otherwise you will get exceptions, is sometimes you only have to change 1 or 2 or 3 values. At that point, you have multiple options. There's withers within the JEP 468, if I'm remembering it correctly, that will allow you to only supply the fields that you want changed, but that hasn't been added to the JDK yet, unfortunately. They planned it with Java 23 2 years ago, but it's not in there yet. I think mostly because they have some challenges making it robust. And of course, as we know, Java's robustness is one of their main selling points. So for now, what you can also do is write a builder or write your own with functions. So the idea that you use records to lessen on the boilerplate, that's unfortunately not always the case at the moment. Although nowadays we have AI, so we can actually tell it to build a builder for us, and well, you should be done quite fast. Of course, you should validate that the builder is correct at that point. And as you can see at the bottom of the builder, I am allowing people to add contents here in an array list. But once I create the final object, I will make a list copy of, which is at that point immutable again. So other than this, records, I think, are quite a good approach, lessening your cognitive load within reading your code and also having your colleagues understand your code. If you want to migrate, there's multiple ways to do this. You can do it manually, of course, that's always an option, but yeah, it does take time. If you have a proper IDE like IntelliJ, but also Eclipse, they allow you to convert to a record class. And I do know for IntelliJ that they also allow you to convert it back if it doesn't fit. And that's quite fast. The nice thing with IntelliJ is that it also will cover all the getters and setters, because what happens in the record is that if you had a get height, for example, in the box class, that will change to a .height, because everything is transparent. You don't longer need a getter and setter. You can't even use a setter. Another thing we've been using within ING is that you can actually use open rewrite, because they have a nice recipe to do Lombok value to record. So if you use Lombok a lot and all your immutable classes were a value at that point, you can use that to migrate within about a minute. But we did have to change some things because we also use method references within our code. For example, in filters, it doesn't understand that. So the double dots that you call the method on the class, you have to change those manually. It still works with records, but it does, it does cost you some extra work. But you will notice that when you migrate and start testing if everything is still working afterwards. So the main thing is, should you be migrating? I think because Java is moving along, we should migrate slowly. If we have immutable data and we expect immutable data to be in the class, it lowers our cognitive load. Then you should start doing it. And you don't have to do everything at once. You can start slowly by, when you add a new class or new functionality, at that point start using records, whenever it makes sense, of course. So if you still need to mutate data, just use your normal classes, but migrate along the way. You don't have to do everything big bang at once. And as always, it depends on what you're building, what you're trying to achieve, etc. But I think overall, it will improve the quality of your code, and it will also allow you to more easily understand your code when you're reading it over time. Because I typically don't remember what I wrote 6 months ago. I really have to think back like, okay, what did I do at that point and why did I do it? So records do help out there at that point. And yeah, use them where they add value, but that's the same thing. It depends on how are you going to create value. So in order to prepare for this talk, I also wrote 2 blog posts, including one about copying. And let me quickly switch to an example because I have a few minutes left. The withers that I just mentioned, they were supposed to be part of Java 23, JEP 468. And the idea that they have with it is like you would write it like this. So you have the original object, you would do a with, and you would add the fields that you would actually like to be changed. So the original fields that you don't mention will be copied at that point. But unfortunately, they haven't added it as a preview feature yet. They did plan it for Java 23, then 24, then 25, and hopefully 26 will get it, but we'll see. So if you want to read more about the records, then, well, you can check out my blogs. They are quite long. I think the first one is 12 minutes readable, so, but it includes some of the examples here as well that I just showed you on screen. That's it. But I do have some time for questions. So if there's any questions, please go ahead. Yep. Yeah, so where would it make value to add records? Like I mentioned, also one of the reasons to start this talk was because we had one project running into an issue with, we would expect it to be immutable data, but it turned out to be immutable over the years that it was built. So when we moved to records at that point, we did notice like, hey, stuff broke here, our tests are failing, and they are failing because we are adding data, so we could actually fix the bug that we didn't know about. You could say, yeah, your customer should have reported that, so it might not be an issue, but in the end, the code was better and more robust from that point on. So, and the changes that you have to do to migrate to a record are in fact minimal. That's also the way we found out about the array lists, adding them to records and then actually adjusting data within the object itself. The low memory is of course direct, but that's bits and bytes, so it's minimal. But if you're doing 1 million transactions per a couple of minutes, then yeah, it starts to make sense at that point. So if you're in a container, for example, running into memory issues, it might work out as well. I think the performance is also slightly better, but Java is already so fast, it's marginal. So you always, when you do performance testing, test it for your use cases. Any other questions? Another one? Let's do that one first, and then if you have time left. Yeah, so the question is, can you extend it to do other getters and setters as well without get set? You can't set because it's a record that's supposed to be immutable. But for example, a getter like putting a first name, last name together, that's fully not an issue. You can just add that. For example, I had the dimensions. I can actually give you the full dimensions in one object back as well if I want to. So you can extend it upon as much as you want. But do try to keep your code readable. So if I would give dimensions back, I would make a new record to have those 3 dimensions in it, for example. I'm out of time now. If anyone would like to give feedback as well, please scan the code. It's all anonymous, so feel free to give me the feedback. And if you want to do anything on social or have any other questions, then feel free to reach out. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm also on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter that much anymore. So typically, if you want an answer, use Blue Sky. Thanks for your time.